The dress floated like a dying prayer against the riverbank, its blue fabric darkened to black where the blood had soaked through. Tom Brennan stood knee-deep in the cold water, his weathered hands trembling as he lifted the torn garment from the muddy shallows. The morning sun caught the fabric, revealing delicate stitching around the collar, the kind of work only one seamstress in Copper Creek could manage. Sarah Mitchell's dress, the banker's daughter who'd gone missing 3 days ago. Tom's breath caught in his throat as he examined the tears in the fabric. Not random damage from river rocks or brambles. These were deliberate cuts, precise slashes that spoke of violence and intent. Dark stains painted the bodice in patterns that made his stomach turn. He'd seen enough death in his 43 years to recognize what he was holding. The Brennan Ranch sat 5 miles upstream from town, isolated by choice and necessity. Tom had built his life in this lonely valley after the war, seeking peace in the silence of cattle and endless sky. But peace was a luxury that seemed determined to elude him. First his wife's death from fever 2 winters back, then the drought that nearly broke him, and now this evidence of something terrible that would drag him back into a world he'd tried to leave behind. He waded back to shore, the dress clutched against his chest like a burden he wasn't ready to bear. His horse, a steady buckskin named Judge, watched with intelligent eyes as Tom wrapped the garment in his coat. The animal sensed his master's distress, ears flicking nervously at every sound from the surrounding cottonwoods. As Tom mounted, his mind raced through possibilities. Sarah Mitchell was 22, beautiful and engaged to the sheriff's son. She had no enemies that he knew of, no reason for someone to harm her. But the blood on that dress told a different story, one written in violence and desperation. The ride back to his ranch house felt endless. Every shadow seemed to hold watching eyes, every rustling branch a whispered accusation. By the time he reached his porch, the sun had climbed high enough to burn away the morning mist, but the chill in Tom's bones remained. He sat in his kitchen, staring at the blood-stained bundle on his table, knowing that whatever choice he made next would change everything. In a few hours he could ride into town and hand the dress over to Sheriff Morrison, do his civic duty and wash his hands of whatever darkness had claimed Sarah Mitchell. But something held him back, a nagging certainty that this discovery was only the beginning. Tom's hands shook as he unfolded the dress again, studying every tear and stain by lamplight. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, pressing in around him with the weight of decision. Outside, his cattle lowed in the distance, a sound that usually brought him comfort, but now seemed like voices calling from another world. The smart thing would be to ride straight to town, let Sheriff Morrison handle whatever evil had touched Sarah Mitchell. Tom was just a rancher, a man who'd spent the last 5 years trying to forget he'd ever been anything else. But as he examined the fabric more closely, details emerged that made his blood run cold. The cuts weren't random. They formed a pattern, deliberate and precise, 3 parallel slashes across the bodice, then 2 more crossing them at angles. Tom had seen this before, carved into trees along the Mexican border during his days riding with the Rangers. It was a signature, left by men who wanted their work recognized. Los Hermanos Sombra, the Shadow Brothers, a gang of killers who'd terrorized both sides of the Rio Grande until the Rangers had supposedly wiped them out 8 years ago. Tom had been there for that final raid, had watched their leader Diego Morales fall under a hail of bullets. But apparently, some shadows were harder to kill than others. The sound of hoofbeats outside froze him in place. Tom quickly rewrapped the dress and moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. 3 riders approached in the moonlight, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats. They moved with the easy confidence of men who owned whatever ground they rode on. "Brennan," the voice carried the slight accent Tom remembered from his nightmares. "We know you're in there, old friend. Come out and let's talk about what you found by the river." Tom's hand instinctively moved to the Colt .45 hanging on his hip. 8 years of peace shattered in an instant, replaced by the cold calculation that had kept him alive through countless battles. Diego Morales was supposed to be dead, but dead men didn't speak with voices full of cruel amusement. "You always were too curious for your own good, Ranger," the voice continued. "That pretty dress belongs to us now, just like the girl did." The words hit Tom like physical blows. Sarah Mitchell hadn't just been killed. She'd been taken, tortured, murdered by men who remembered him from another life. Men who'd survived his bullet and come back for revenge. Tom moved away from the window, his mind racing through options. The dress was evidence of murder, but it was also bait in a trap 8 years in the making. If he rode to town now, innocent people would die. The Shadow brothers had never shown mercy to anyone who stood between them and their prey. But if he faced them alone, at least the killing would stay here, on his land, away from families and children who'd done nothing to deserve this darkness. Outside, the horses stirred restlessly, and Tom heard the soft sound of men dismounting. The first bullet shattered the kitchen window, spraying glass across the table where Sarah's dress lay hidden. Tom dove to the floor as 2 more shots punched through the wooden walls, splintering the doorframe above his head. The Shadow brothers weren't interested in conversation after all. 8 years we've been waiting for this, Brennan. Diego's voice carried through the night air. Closer now. 8 years of planning how we'd repay you for what you took from us. Tom Army crawled across the floor to his gun cabinet, glass crunching under his elbows. His fingers found the familiar weight of his Winchester, the same rifle that had served him through dozens of battles along the border. Muscle memory took over as he checked the magazine and worked the action, the metallic sound as comforting as a prayer. Through the broken window, he caught glimpses of movement in the darkness. The Shadow brothers were spreading out, surrounding the house with the patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. Orange muzzle flashes lit the night as they kept up a steady harassment fire, not trying to kill him yet, just keeping him pinned while they maneuvered into position. Tom's mind raced through the layout of his property. The barn sat 50 yards to the north, the well pump another 30 beyond that. If he could reach the barn, he'd have better cover and multiple escape routes. But that meant crossing open ground under the guns of men who'd spent years dreaming of this moment. A new sound reached his ears, the terrified lowing of cattle. The bastards were driving his herd, using the animals as cover for their approach. Tom felt a surge of rage that surprised him with its intensity. These men had already taken Sarah Mitchell's life. Now they were destroying everything he'd built in his search for peace. "You remember Miguel, don't you?" Diego called out, his accented voice dripping with mock sadness. "My younger brother, the one you put a bullet through in Presidio." Tom remembered. Miguel Morales had been barely 18, quick with a gun but quicker to cruelty. He'd been reaching for a hidden derringer when Tom's shot took him down. A clean death, more mercy than the boy had shown his victims. He died slow, Brennan. Took him 3 days. 3 days of calling your name with his last breaths. The psychological warfare was working. Tom could feel the old guilt creeping back, the weight of all the men he'd killed in service to the badge. But Sarah Mitchell's blood-stained dress reminded him that some men deserved killing. Some evils couldn't be reasoned with or reformed. A shadow moved past the window, too quick to be coincidence. They were making their move. Tom rolled to his feet and put 3 quick shots through the wall where he'd seen the movement. A scream of pain and cursing in Spanish told him he'd found his mark. But the victory was short-lived as answering fire erupted from 2 other positions, forcing him back to the floor. The smell of smoke reached his nostrils. They were burning him out. Through the growing haze of smoke, Tom saw something that stopped his heart cold. A 4th figure moved through the firelight, smaller than the others, stumbling rather than walking. As the figure drew closer to the window, Tom caught sight of a face he'd thought he'd never see again. Sarah Mitchell, alive. Her face was bruised and streaked with tears, her hair matted with blood, but she was breathing. The dress by the river hadn't been torn from her corpse. It had been a message, a cruel taunt designed to draw him into this trap. The Shadow brothers had kept her alive for this moment, knowing that Tom Brennan would never leave an innocent to die. "You see her, don't you?" Diego's voice carried a note of satisfaction. "Still pretty, even after 3 days of our hospitality. We were going to kill her quick, but then we realized she could serve a better purpose." Sarah's eyes found Tom's through the broken window. Even in the firelight, he could see the desperate hope flickering there, the same look he'd seen on countless faces during his ranger days. People who believed that if they could just hold on a little longer, help would come. Tom had rarely disappointed them. "Here's the trade, old friend," Diego continued. "You walk out that door with your hands empty, and we'll make it quick for both of you. Keep fighting, and we'll take our time with the girl, show her the same hospitality we learned from Comancheros down in the Badlands." The threat hit Tom like a physical blow. He'd seen what the Comancheros did to their captives, witnessed the aftermath of their work too many times to count. Sarah Mitchell didn't deserve that fate. No one did. But as Tom looked at her face, he saw something else beneath the fear: determination. Sarah raised her hand slightly, showing him something clutched in her palm. Even from across the yard, he could make out the shape of a small knife, probably taken from one of her captors during a moment of carelessness. She was waiting for her chance, just as he was waiting for his. Tom caught her eye and nodded once, a tiny gesture that spoke volumes. He'd learned long ago that sometimes the greatest act of faith was trusting someone else's courage. Sarah had survived 3 days in hell, and still had fight left in her. That deserved respect. The smoke was getting thicker now, flames beginning to lick at the eastern wall of the house. Soon the building would be uninhabitable, forcing him into the open whether he liked it or not. But perhaps that was exactly what both he and Sarah needed. Sometimes the only way out was through. Tom moved to the door, Winchester in hand, and waited for the moment when courage and desperation would have to be enough. Tom burst through the door as the flames reached the roof, rolling left as bullets whined through the space where he'd been standing. In the same instant, Sarah drove her small blade into the neck of the man holding her, twisting away as he screamed and fell. The coordination was perfect, born not of planning but of shared desperation and trust. Diego spun towards Sarah, raising his pistol, but Tom's Winchester barked twice in rapid succession. The first shot spun the outlaw leader around, the second dropped him into the dirt beside his fallen brother. 8 years of nightmares ended in 2 heartbeats. The third shadow brother, wounded by Tom's earlier shots, tried to flee toward the horses. He made it 10 yards before Sarah's thrown knife found its mark between his shoulder blades. The girl who'd spent 3 days in captivity had learned something about survival that would stay with her forever. Tom reached Sarah as she collapsed, catching her before she could fall. Up close, he could see the full extent of what she'd endured: bruises that would heal, cuts that would scar, and eyes that held depths of knowledge no 22-year-old should possess. "It's over," he whispered, and for the first time in years he believed it. Sheriff Morrison arrived at dawn with a posse of 12 men, drawn by the smoke visible from town. They found Tom and Sarah sitting on the porch of the burned-out house, sharing coffee from Tom's dented camp pot. The bodies of the Shadow brothers lay where they'd fallen, testimony to a long-delayed justice. The investigation was brief. Sarah's testimony, combined with Tom's reputation and the evidence of the dress, painted a clear picture. The Shadow brothers had survived their supposed death 8 years earlier, nursing their hatred and planning revenge. Sarah Mitchell had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, a tool in their scheme for retribution. But tools could become weapons in the right hands. Tom testified at the inquest with characteristic brevity, saying only that evil men had come to his land seeking violence, and found more than they'd bargained for. The town fathers declared him a hero, but Tom knew better. Heroes didn't wake up at night remembering the sound of dying men calling for their mothers. 6 months later, Tom stood at the edge of his rebuilt house, watching Sarah Mitchell, now Sarah Brennan, hang laundry on the line they'd strung between 2 cottonwoods. The marriage had surprised everyone in Copper Creek, but Tom understood what others couldn't. Some bonds were forged in fire and sealed with blood. Some connections transcended the ordinary rules of courtship and propriety. Sarah looked up from her work and smiled, the same expression of quiet determination he'd seen that night when she'd clutched a stolen knife and waited for her moment. She'd chosen to stay with him not out of gratitude or trauma, but because she'd recognized something in his character that matched her own. They were both survivors who'd looked into darkness and refused to blink. As the sun set over the valley, painting the sky the color of old blood, Tom realized that peace wasn't something you found in solitude. Sometimes it was something you built with another person, one quiet day at a time, in the shadow of shared understanding. The river still flowed past their land, carrying away secrets and memories in its endless current, but the bloodied dress was gone now, burned with the old house and the ghosts that had haunted it. In its place was something harder to name but easier to live with, the knowledge that when darkness came calling, they would face it together.
Oh.
Years later, when their grandchildren asked about the scars on their grandmother's hands and the careful way their grandfather watched the horizon, Tom and Sarah would exchange a look that said everything and nothing. Some stories were too dark for daylight telling, but in the quiet moments before sleep, when the house settled around them like a benediction, they would remember that night when courage and desperation had proven stronger than revenge and hatred. The dress by the river had been a message. Their survival had been the answer.